We'll start with something really basic. Just out of curiosity, how many people here actually know what cryptocurrencies are? Okay. Okay, great. For those of us who don't know what cryptocurrencies are, it's a lot of different things, and it's confusing. It can be digital money, so you can actually use it to pay somebody. It can be a transaction on a blockchain holding a record of something. It can be a store of value. It can be a whole bunch of different things. And that's what makes it confusing from a policy perspective. From a policy perspective, people are trying to have one policy for money, a separate policy for documentation and things like that. So this kind of blends a lot of that together, and that's why it's confusing for a lot of governments especially, but definitely people. The other thing that confuses people is that there's no company behind many cryptocurrencies. There's no government behind many cryptocurrencies. It's an open source project like Bitcoin, right? And I'll talk about Bitcoin a little bit later.
I have a question,
Yeah.
Pankaj. Is it a currency? Is it a commodity? Is it a security?
Yes.
What is it?
Yes.
Because it seems to be all three.
Yes. Yes.
So how is it all three?
A lot of it depends on how you use the technology, right? So if you need to pay me, I can send you an invoice and you can pay me in a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. In that particular instance, we're using it as money, right? Now, at the same time, if you remember, I think it was 2018 or 2017, in China, there was significant cases of abuse and sexual misconduct amongst university professors, and the Me Too movement was taking rise. So there was, I forget if it was a student or a professor, but she actually wrote on the blockchain, and if I'm not mistaken, it was the Bitcoin blockchain, records of what happened, right? So in that particular instance, it was documentation. It wasn't even a security. It was just documenting what happened and making sure that that information was available to everyone globally, right? So it can be many different things. It depends on how you decide to use it. Does that help?
No, I'm actually more confused now than I was earlier.
Okay. So, all right.
So I understand.
I'm going to scrap this whole presentation. We'll just do question and answer.
Sorry.
Okay. No. Only because I think I may not have gone lower level enough to do that. So I'll hold off on this for the time being. What is blockchain? It's a database, okay? And a database that is decentralized and spread out across the globe, right? At its core, it's horribly slow. It's very bad for doing fast transactions, but it's very good for stability because everyone in this room can start an instance of that database and say, yes, I have a copy of this database running on my computer at home, right? So you can delete 99% of the other databases, but if there's 1% still running, the information is still available. It's still there.
So it brings in verifiability of something.
And immutability in practice, right? Okay. Because it becomes, the more and more nodes that come up online, the harder it is to erase everything that's on that blockchain, right? So that database just keeps spreading out and it keeps growing.
So what cryptocurrencies are essentially values that's noted on that blockchain which is immutable?
So a cryptocurrency or a crypto asset is some sort of token that is saying, yes, this transaction has happened on this blockchain, right? And you can store some data, right? Certain blockchains you can do a lot more, but let's say Bitcoin, you can store like ASCII characters in a transactions, right? So or you can do multiple transactions. If you want to write a longer post, like the woman in China who did, she did multiple transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain and told her whole story on the Bitcoin blockchain, right? So that was not a security, it was not a currency, it was a transaction that she was doing just to write data to the blockchain, which is the underlying database. The blockchain is the underlying database. The transaction, in this case, Bitcoin, is the token that allows that transaction to actually happen on that database. Is that clearer?
Now I don't know what a token is.
Bitcoin. In this particular instance of the woman in China, Bitcoin is the token. So all it is a representation, a digital representation of keys being exchanged for a transaction to be written to the database. And I'll talk about keys a little bit afterwards, but essentially encrypted, right? So if I have a key, only I can unlock that transaction. Okay, and there are public keys and private keys. And I'll talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
This is a very, very complex snowball that just gets messier and messier. That's why it's called jumping down the rabbit hole. Once you fall down that rabbit hole, you just keep going and going and going and going. And you're still constantly learning. Because it's like, wait, I didn't know that. 3 years in, it's like, oh, that's new.
Okay.
Right? So it is complex, and by no means is everyone going to become a blockchain and Bitcoin expert today. This is really just enough to scare you, enough to say, hey, maybe I should learn a little bit more. Yeah?
Okay.
I think blockchain is the technology behind the cryptocurrency.
Yes.
That is the base of every tokenism or any currency in that way.
Token, currency are interchangeable language. Okay? Yes, it is the technology. And as I was saying, blockchain is the database layer of the technology where the data is stored. The token or the cryptocurrency is the medium by which something gets written to that database.
Blockchain can be used for independent of currency for any other database management and
Yes, but that, in my opinion, and this is purely my opinion, that's foolish to do. You have ultra-fast databases. Why would you use a really slow database, right? And the power that blockchain provides is when everyone in this room, independent of each other, is running a node and copy of that database, right? So that provides immutability. Mm-hmm. If you're running a private blockchain, you're running your own version. You can change records, you can do whatever you want, which you could do in a regular database also. So why would you run a blockchain?
So in the context of this Chinese lady, did she have to do like a cryptocurrency exchange or transaction to be able to write on the blockchain?
So she did a transaction, yes. Now, I don't remember the exact details. She might have done a transaction between two of her own addresses on the blockchain. I don't know if there was another party on the other end of that transaction. That I don't recall.
She was just writing on the database?
Yeah.
Writing on the database, and because the system asked for a transaction fee, she was paying that minimal transaction fee just to write, because the Bitcoin software can be downloaded and be used by anyone here. That's how decentralized it is. It's an open source system. So she made her own posting database where only the transaction fee was being given. That's it.
I actually want to understand, how do you derive value from cryptocurrency? Because my understanding of money is that money, it's also a good and exchange, it's a fiat currency. But how do I derive a value out of a cryptocurrency? Who creates that value? And how is it exchanged, then that value is created? And can somebody just start creating value at any place?
This may seem like a cop-out answer, but the truth is, how do you derive value from anything? It's between two parties deciding that there is some value ascribed to something, right? That shirt could be worth 1,000 rupees because you say it is. But somebody has to agree that it's worth 1,000 rupees, right? If I don't agree, then that value comes into question. But if I agree, yes, this is a 1,000 rupee shirt, then we've agreed that there is value here. And with cryptocurrencies or any asset of any kind, right? I mean, just look at whether you're talking about real estate in Delhi or you're talking about startup valuations. Some people are going to scratch their heads and say, this is insane, this makes no sense. Other people are going to say, oh, this is cheap, this is a great deal, let me put some money in, right? So it's what two parties or multiple parties think has value and can agree, that's what ascribes value. Like gold has no inherent value whatsoever, zero. There's zero inherent value to gold or diamonds or to the rupee. Why do we ascribe value to it? So same.
Yeah, so it's primarily related to, one is the system of beliefs that all of us believe that it has a certain value, and second is it's primarily dependent on the demand and supply, limited supply. So there's more demand, and that's where the value comes from.
Absolutely.
So in this case, that's what I'm trying to understand. I mean, because that's why I said I don't understand anything about it. So if somebody starts to mine cryptocurrencies or so it's like almost you're mushrooming out of nowhere, and you're trying to create value of something that did not exist before. So how do you, one, create the system of belief that normally is there in an exchange, and the second thing is the demand and supply question. So that's where my question was coming from.
Okay, so let's go back to 2009 when the Bitcoin white paper first came out. When the Bitcoin white paper first came out, there was no technology yet. It was a proposal for building something, right? And there were researchers, there were cryptographers, there were all kinds of folks that were commenting on that, sharing it amongst each other, and it was an academic exercise, okay? Once the technology came out, people started using it in very, very small circles. And it was primarily academic still, to learn, like, how can we transfer value digitally without having to go to your bank or to the government for permission. Now, you fast forward to, let's say, 2013. Bitcoin now has a value of $1,000 a coin because demand for it suddenly has risen. And why did demand rise? Sure, illicit activities for sure. Silk Road had a fairly important role to play in the spread of use of Bitcoin, right? Once you had that demand, the press caught on. And they're like, whoa, this thing went from, like, a millionth of a cent to $1,000. And overnight, people have become billionaires. Great story to tell. So what does that do? That fuels more demand. It's like, wait, somebody else got rich, I should get rich too, so let me go buy some, right? And now you have the demand side. Now people who are holding it, they're able to sell it. And they'll say, well, look, if somebody's willing to pay me $1,000 for one Bitcoin, sure, I'll sell it. I got it for, $24, I got 10,000 Bitcoins. And there are documented stories of people who have, in the early days, spent thousands and thousands of Bitcoin for, frivolous things like pizza. Right? There was one researcher, I think it was in Norway, he bought a few Bitcoin really, really early on as a research project. Fast forward, I think it was 2015 or 16, he was able to sell his Bitcoin and buy an apartment. Right? So, supply and demand is inherent. That's an inherent part of what Bitcoin did. Right? It's economics, it's legal, it's technology. It's multidisciplinary. You have to take all of these disciplines into account and bring them in. But like I said, this is like much further down the line.
So completely obviously agree with what Pankaj said, but I'll just add one or two more points. Today, if you want to transfer money from one place to the other and you use PayPal or Western Union or SWIFT, we commonly are willing to pay them a fee. So we might pay a 1% fee or a 0.1% fee or some amount of fee to help money transfer. So if I were to write a transaction where I'm sending him money from Singapore to New York City, for instance, and there is a transaction fee which you refer to as the mining fee or the minimum fee required, if I can put together into one coin a certain number of transactions, actually I should not say one coin, it should be one block, but I'm making it relatively easier, one chunk. Would you agree that for the service of transferring value from one place to the other, a certain amount of fee is recommended? And if a certain mechanism or a block or a certain unit can transfer so much amount of money, it should by itself, this service should be worth so much, that could be one more way to view it. Having said that, and I don't want to take over your conversation
Please.
Let me tell you, a lot of the questions that came up primarily come from one interesting aspect, that what we are dealing with is a new asset class. What's an asset class? Real estate is an asset class. Money or currency, as we call it today, is an asset class. Ownership into business enterprises, which could be called shares, is an asset class. Loans, which is called debt, is an asset class. Right? Let me ask you, in your lifetime, from the time you were born up to now, we are not talking of crypto for a second. Tell me an asset class that came into existence during your lifetime. So that this doesn't get you into argument, I'm going to answer that also. The answer is none. Land ownership or ownership over an asset has existed like for hundreds if not thousands of years.
Domain names.
So here's the thing.
Yeah.
What has happened is
Yeah.
derivative assets such as futures, options, domain names, vanity instruments, typically are riding on top of other assets. Like for example, you could say, okay, futures and options on the stock market were not there in India until SEBI allowed it. So that's a new asset class. So what happens is that that is riding on top of an existing asset class. Domain names likewise being ownership over a virtual asset. Because we have never, no human being alive has ever encountered a new asset class being emerged, we have no choice but to understand this by comparing it to that. So for example, when you said demand and supply, while sure the prices on exchanges such as the one we run are dependent on demand and supply, but that does not attribute the value. Your question was what attributes value? Why should Bitcoin not be worth zero all the time? Right? So the challenge is arising because we are seeing a new asset class. In fact, even dealing with regulators, we find the same. I don't want to make this an entire speech, but this is where you have to understand that the multidisciplinary thing he talked about, I think that is what gives, this is the only instrument which is multidisciplinary and attributes value to it.
He's absolutely right, right? This is something that is very new and something that people don't really understand. So you're trying to fit it into what you do understand, certain spheres of knowledge, and saying cram it in there. So, but that's what also makes it so exciting and interesting, is that it is new. It's not just an asset class. It is a lot of different things, right? Saying that it's an asset class is just one aspect of what cryptocurrencies or blockchain technology allows you to do, right? So I'll continue on, and again, feel free to stop me if you have questions. Really simply, what is cryptography?
You're being stopped right now.
Okay.
Before you move on,
Yes.
I might have a very naive or a basic question,
Yes.
which is to say that in the technology, in the blockchain technology itself, the first node is most important, as we said, because everything comes back to that one node. Even if you delete all the other data points or all the other nodes attached to it, you could still trace back to the first node. How to create that first node, or what goes into the creation of that technology itself? Because I understood that maybe somebody here also explained that how blockchain is maybe just a software technology, and when you do cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, you are building a hardware over a software. I may not be right in using that term, but maybe it's a technology which is facilitating other things.
Sure.
So I want to understand how this first node is created and what goes into the creation of that node and where does it emerge from?
So essentially it's software, right? So any one of us can pull out our laptops and write certain software that uses certain key concepts like cryptography and encryption, and allows us to have one transaction that is linked to another transaction, right? So let's not start from scratch. Let's use technology that's already out there. Most cryptocurrency software is open source, so you can go online, you can download it today, you can make some changes to it. So if, for example, you can download the Bitcoin original open source software, you can make some changes to it and say, you know what, I want the block size to be 2 megabytes. I want there to be 42 million Bitcoin instead of 21 million. And now on your computer, you can do the first transaction, create what's called the Genesis block, and you have your blockchain up and running. Okay?
And it's a private blockchain.
Well, it may not be private because you're not intending it to be used only within a certain group.
Sorry, I don't know what a public and a private.
Okay, I'll explain that. So a public blockchain is like Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of the cryptocurrencies that all of us talk about on a regular basis. A private blockchain or a consortium chain is something that is a closed blockchain that is only being used between certain parties. So we in this room may not be able to transact on that, but certain companies are running that blockchain. So for example, JP Morgan is well known to have done a lot of research and deployed private blockchains internally for testing, and they're using security transaction settlement to happen on the blockchain. We don't have access to those blockchains. That's a private blockchain, probably within JP Morgan and maybe some of their counterparties.
And that's meant to create immutability within of information or
Immutability is questionable. I would say no, that doesn't create immutability in any way, shape, or form. But there are buzzwords that people feel like, hey, they need to investigate certain technology and see how it can be used, and can it provide certain benefits over existing technology. So that's why a lot of these larger companies are researching. IBM is at the forefront of building private blockchains to be deployed, within companies or within a group of companies for certain industries, right? It's still yet to be determined whether that is the right direction to go, or should they be building private secure layers on top of public chains?
Wouldn't a private blockchain then kind of negate the concept that it shouldn't be controlled by one
Yeah.
party?
Yes.
Because theoretically, if someone controls 51% of the blockchain, they can override, right?
Exactly. So I didn't want to get into that because that's slightly more advanced, but yes, the whole idea of a private blockchain, like to a lot of us, doesn't make any sense. The real value from the blockchain is the fact that it is public and there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of nodes that are running, and it becomes very hard and very difficult to take 51% of the network and create that attack. Yes.
So a public blockchain is something that everybody can use and everybody has copies of the transactions that has happened on the
Yes and no. So in the beginning, yes, you had to run your own node to be able to do a transaction, which meant having a full copy of the whole database. Since then, the technology has improved, and now you can actually do transactions on your mobile phone. You can download what are called light wallets. So they don't have a full history of the chain on the device itself, but they have some version of transactions that are happening so that you can interact with the blockchain without having to maintain the full database. Make sense? Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm taking this discussion about 5 minutes back. Nikhil asked, right in the beginning, asked the question, is it a currency, commodity, or security? And the idea of a currency is that it's rooted in government sanction, which is the idea of the fiat money, which is why, well, barter system would work differently, but now in the 21st century, currency is understood as fiat money.
Okay.
Let's just go with that assumption for
Okay.
a second. Now, the problem with cryptocurrency is that it's not sanctioned by any government of the world. So how do we understand cryptocurrency as any kind of currency when all of us are accustomed to the idea that currency must be sanctioned, must be fiat money, so to say?
Is gold sanctioned?
But gold's value is also rooted in certain form of currency or money, which has been sanctioned by...
No.
Yeah.
No.
Could I just...
Absolutely
I
not.
take back my word, sorry.
Gold itself was used as a currency for thousands of years, right? Because there was, hey, it's hard to find this shiny little thing, and I'll say it's worth something, and if you agree, fantastic, right? Yeah, same. Well, oil has actually usage, right? And gold eventually found usage. In the beginning, it didn't have any usage, but eventually it found usage. Oil has had inherent usage, from the beginning, right? Like with cryptocurrencies, again, coming back to what I was saying before, a lot of it is just, hey, do we agree? It is going back to a peer-to-peer barter system in a lot of ways, right? We can decide what it's worth, but because now these cryptocurrencies are not, being used in very small, fragmented communities that don't have access to the outside world, we can look online right now and say, all right, this is what Bitcoin is trading at across international exchanges, right? Or an aggregated average price across all major exchanges. This is what Bitcoin's at, right? We have futures contracts being traded on sanctioned exchanges in the United States. So we know, hey, this is a futures contract for Bitcoin, cash settled, so we know exactly what it's worth, right? You may disagree, and that's okay. You can put in your bid accordingly.
So Pankaj, if I may get you right, what you're saying is Bitcoin is essentially, so it has a limited amount, which is about 21 million, right? And that scarcity effectively gives it value, and the difficulty in creating it gives it value.
That's right, and the difficulty continues to increase as well.
And the difficulty keeps continuing to increase, therefore that's one of the reasons why the value might increase. Now that item or that token which has value can be traded and therefore used to pay for something, and therefore it becomes a currency. But also there are people that are investing in it, and therefore it can be seen as a security, and therefore you said it's all three. Is this accurate?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it was not known as cryptocurrency till about late 2012, being 2013. It was known as electronic cash. That's how the white paper has been defined as. It's an electronic cash, it's a peer-to-peer system. So cryptocurrency is an economist word which was given way back in 2012-13.
Yeah. And one of the...
and the value also is, or the transactions that take place are recorded on the blockchain, and that's where the blockchain bit comes in.
No, it's not constant. So right now, the software says that for Bitcoin, there will only be 21 million Bitcoin ever. But every block that gets mined creates a certain number of Bitcoin. And every few years, approximately every 4 to 5 years, it becomes half. So difficulty of creating that block continues to increase, and the reward for creating that block continue to decrease over time. So you have, the supply being more and more constrained over time, and demand, if it continues to rise, is going to push the price up, right? So the next halving is going to be next year, approximately, right? That's when the ability to create a block will increase significantly, the difficulty will increase significantly, and the reward for creating that block will decrease by half. So typically, you see that there's a major spike in the price of Bitcoin when that happens. So this is kind of trying to illustrate what a transaction looks like. It's very long, complex characters that show that this is a transaction, and who are the parties within the transaction. These are the addresses that are happening, that are used to make the transaction. Now these, and forgive me, but these are part of what's the encryption piece, right? This is the public key, which is essentially your address. You can give out your public key to anybody, let people send you money to that public key. Your private key is what you use to actually enable a transaction, right? That you do not want getting out anywhere, because if somebody has your private key, they can basically take your money. And if you lose your private key, you can never access your money again. It's gone. So, and yeah, again, transaction address or transaction ID, you can always go back and you can see what transaction and what parties were a party to that transaction. And I don't want to get into details, but there are companies today that are spending a lot of money doing forensic reviews of every transaction to see where it's gone, to the point where the US government, I think earlier this year, identified a particular person in Iran that was on their sanctions list and put their Bitcoin address on the sanctions list. Right? So now it's becoming, when people say Bitcoin is anonymous, they're wrong. It's not anonymous. In fact, you can actually trace every single transaction that a person is doing if you put the right on-ramps and off-ramps in place. So miners.
Where does one see that this stuff, like the previous slide what you showed to us, how does someone see this?
Blockchain.info.
Okay.
That's the website. Simple. And you can take any one of these addresses or any address that somebody else gives you or transaction ID, put it in there, and you can see what's going on. Right, so this one was 12.6 BTC transaction.
So just a small question. Is it only for Bitcoin or for all blockchain transactions?
So I am using Bitcoin as a proxy for all other cryptocurrencies.
So the website that you're saying, blockchain.info.
Yes, for Bitcoin. Yeah. For Ethereum, there's, was it Ethinfo? Etherscan, yeah. For Tezos, there's TZScan. All of them have some sort of block explorer that will allow you to look at transactions and addresses. So miners, we touched on miners, but we haven't really talked about what miners are. Miners are the people that are putting lots and lots of money into very, very expensive and powerful computers that are sitting there creating Bitcoin. But how are they creating them? Through solving a very complex mathematical puzzle. And that puzzle keeps getting harder and harder to solve. right? That's part of the software. It's not possible to predict what the solution is going to be. You just have to put a lot of horsepower behind it. So that is what people are talking about when they talk about proof of work, right? You're proving that you're doing a certain amount of work to solve this puzzle. You've solved it before everybody else has, so you get the reward. You take all the transactions that are out there, you stuff them into that block and get the reward and push it out.
So my question is regarding, so you spoke about miners using sophisticated computers and mining a block gets harder as we progress. So my question is regarding the underlying power consumption that goes into this. And I've read about this being a very power intensive activity, and more advanced countries sort of have an edge here, and I want to understand if this is a valid concern for India, where it would be whether this power consumption aspect is a valid concern, and if so, then how does India go about navigating this space? And if you could just sort of explain why this is such a power intensive activity to begin with.
So I'm not an engineer, but computer chips use a lot of energy. They give off a lot of heat, and the harder they work, the more heat they give off and the more energy they consume, right? So with cryptocurrencies, not just Bitcoin, but most cryptocurrencies, the trend recently has been to create chips that are specific to solving that puzzle. So they're very specialized chips. They're called ASIC chips. And they're better, they're more efficient than general purpose chips, but they still consume a lot of power. And the harder the rise in difficulty will continue to make it harder and harder to create a block, and hence you will need more power and more cooling to have more powerful processors.
Could I just jump in? So the interesting part about power consumption is that while Bitcoin started in 2009, the first time you heard that too much power is being consumed was around September, October of 2017. And you people largely stopped talking about it by June 2018. I'll explain why. See, what happens is that the machines that were used then to mine Bitcoin, today's machine, which is just 1.5 years later, are about 4 times more powerful, but with the same power consumption. Because of the rise in the price of Bitcoin, suddenly everybody in the world wanted to mine. Mining is basically creating Bitcoin, right? So the demand for the machines overshot the advancement in technology. Usually both these things move hand in hand as they moved from 2009 to 2017. So nobody cried about increased power consumption. And by the way, since post mid 2018 also people have stopped crying, because now, despite if the difficulty power goes up 4 times, you can still solve it with the same amount of energy. So the challenge is this mismatch. So tomorrow if Bitcoin price, let's say, goes down to 1/10 or 10 times, once again you will see people saying that it's too expensive or too less expensive to do it.
So my question is, as a user of cryptocurrency, where do we lie on the blockchain? Like where are we on the blockchain? Are we as a node, or are we as a branch of that blockchain? As users, where do we see ourselves on the blockchain? So
you could run a node. You can download a copy of the software, install it on your computer, and run a copy of the node. You can do transactions on it as well if you like, right? If you just want to run a node and have a copy of the database running and helping the network, fine. Even if you're not doing any transactions using that particular node, you can take out your phone and download Blue Wallet or any other light wallet and start doing transactions through that without running a full node. You had something. So you are a user, right? But you can also be a part of the infrastructure. If you have access to the equipment, you can become a miner. It depends on what part of the chain you want to engage on, right? Some people do all of them. Some people do just one piece.
So also, if I'm a miner, what is it that actually I get when I mine a cryptocurrency?
So right now it's 12.5 Bitcoin per block.
But what is the product of mining it? Like, what am I looking for when I say that I'm mining a cryptocurrency? What is it I'm talking to? What is the tangible, or not even tangible, the virtual thing that I'm looking for after mining a cryptocurrency?
What you're looking for?
what is
The task.
what is
the task?
mining?
So,
What do
I mean, you're solving a mathematical puzzle. That's what your computer is doing.
is that puzzle on the cloud or
Yes.
what is the puzzle all about?
It's a distributed technology, right? So that puzzle is available to everybody who's running a miner consecutively. And everybody's competing with each other to solve that puzzle first. Whoever solves it first gets, sorry.
And
And
faster
we're-
and faster.
Yes.
Yeah.
So whoever solves it first gets the reward, which is 12.5 Bitcoin right now.
So every time you solve a puzzle, you get a 12.5 Bitcoin.
Yes, so every 10 minutes, a block, roughly every 10 minutes, a block is created, and 12.5 Bitcoin is given as a reward to the miner who solved that part of the puzzle at that time.
And that's how the net value of Bitcoin increases with.
Well, the
every
net
puzzle.
value doesn't increase because
The
of
net
that.
amount of.
The usage increases because of that, and the availability of more Bitcoin. Yeah.
Yeah, the inventory increases, and of course, as per the Metcalfe rule, you'll have more people in the network, and
Yes.
that's how the value goes up.
Yes.
So one is you said at the start that there's a limited amount of Bitcoin that can be created. Did I get that correct?
Yes, there's 21 million potential.
And why is that? Because I think what
That's
you
part of the software.
that's part of the software. So can't
Can
you
it be
build?
changed? Yes.
Okay.
But it has to be changed by consensus.
It has to be
Everybody has
changed.
to agree that it should be changed. So everybody who's part of that whole ecosystem, the software developers, the miners, the people running nodes, everybody needs to agree that, yes, we will support a increase in the number of Bitcoin on the network. And if people don't, that's typically when forks happen.
Okay. And the second part, I think, just borrowing from what he was saying, when you are mining, so I think I have a now vague understanding of a mining, but let's say for a one-on-one, if people sitting in this room want to become miners of Bitcoin, what is it like, if you could describe the one-on-one process, what is it that people need to do and what is it that people would be doing? And what are the other stakeholders that I'm interacting with? So you said software, developers, et cetera, et cetera. If you could lay down that map, I think it probably would make a better picture in my head.
Okay, well, I'm not a miner. So, I mean, you're essentially, the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna download the software. You're gonna understand how to install and set it up and everything else. Then you're going to get a machine that can actually give you a chance of getting a reward. Otherwise, it's pointless to run a miner, right? So you're gonna spend a lot of money to get a machine that's going to help you get some reward, and you're gonna start running that, okay?
Thank you. So I'll answer one by one. I'm not taking too much time. Mining kya hai? Mining is basically an accounting process. Just like in the bank, when I send money to you, there's a banker sitting somewhere who basically verifies this transaction and allows my money to flow via the bank to you, right? That's the process of the bank. Now, because Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency doesn't have a bank, there's no central bank. So how does my transaction get verified? So there's a machine sitting somewhere which is owned by someone, all right? And the chances, it verifies and validates my transaction to you. When that verification and validation happens, my Bitcoin flows down to you. That's what the machine does. This is an accounting process which is called mining. But in the case of a bank, the teller or the clerk sitting there, he gets a salary. Now, because there's a miner, that mining equipment is owned by, say, Pankaj here, what does he get? Because it's a voluntary system. So the reward system within the entire Bitcoin system is called the incentivization. What is the incentive that he should put his machines? So that's where Bitcoin comes out as a reward to people. Now that's a chance whether you will get a reward or not. So जो कोई भी Bitcoin के transactions को verify validate करेगा, बदले में उसको Bitcoin reward की तरह मिलेगा. That's what mining is all about. So it's an accounting process which is incentivized.
So do you mean it's an incentive for an
Yes,
exchange?
it's primarily an incentive. It's an incentive for the mine, but because there are so many nodes all across the world, there's only a chance. The difficulty that he talks about is basically the probability which that particular computer will get. So I may have 10,000 mining machines, but only one mining machine will end up getting some amount of Bitcoins. And that is the block reward. So the block basically is a group of transactions which have come inside a particular chunk of transactions. I mean, I'm sure people who understand chart accountancy, वो tick mark मारते हैं ना? to every transaction. That's what the mining equipment is doing. But in order to get that 12.5 bitcoins, which is the block reward, the miner has to work very, very hard. And that's what the puzzle is. One mining equipment gets the reward of mining. That's how it gets come. It's not a lottery, it's a mathematical probability. So every machine has what is known as, mathematics inside it. So this puzzle that he talks about is basically an encryption which is there in the block. That encryption needs to be opened by something. Now we get too technical, all right? So a machine is running basically a puzzle. I'm running I want to find out which is the best, number. So 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. That puzzle has the answer 4, but all the machines have to fight against each other to find out which is the fastest one who comes to that one. So whoever arrives at the number 4 gets the block in his name, and the entire block reward of 12.5 bitcoins, along with all the transaction fees accumulated, goes to that machine, that one machine.
So I have a question. I'm a techie and I have been mining myself. I have done it on custom-made rigs that I made. I've done it using pools. My biggest question with blockchain here is that today it is very easy to do, and we all know, most of the people in this room who have been into technology would know these are typically done by your graphic cards or your GPUs on your machine. Today we have the technology of running your GPU via the web. So we have things like WebGL, we have things like shaders that can be run using a website. What is in the blockchain protocol that actually stops anybody from injecting a script and using my computer to mine and make money out of it?
If you don't mind, I'll repeat the question in easy terms. What he's basically saying is that I could go to a website, any website that you visit, it could be indiatimes.com, gmail.com, and the owner of that website might, in the background, be running a Bitcoin mining software. So effectively, they are using your computer to mine Bitcoin for them.
Correct.
What is it about the Bitcoin protocol that stops this?
Yes.
In reality, that is like saying कि ये चाकू है, इससे मर्डर हो सकता है. आपके घर में भी हो सकता है, तो आपके घर ने क्या किया कि ऐसा ना हो? You understand what I am saying? So what we are saying is the problem of the chaku.
But I see it very close to a phishing attempt. I mean, today we have an entire industry talking about ICICI Bank पे phishing हो जाती है, उनकी site पे जाओ, ये check करो.
I actually have an answer for you. What I am saying is that any form of subversive activity, whose job is it to stop? The only thing we can say is that we cannot say that it is everybody else's job except the criminal, because the criminal is the criminal. Everybody else के तुमने garden बनाया, garden में किसने murder किया तो garden किसने बनाया उसको पकड़ो. You get what I'm saying? So what I would say is the Bitcoin protocol does not have any such safeguard, but HTTP, on which we have websites, are supposed to have those safeguards, and they are coming in slowly because it's the chore police game.
And my answer to you is turn off all JavaScript.
Okay.
You're simple. Go use a text browser. You're fine.
A very quick one on anonymity. Is it possible to use the address, the transaction ID and the address to trace it back to the individual or the organization?
It can be, yes.
Okay.
So in the instance I gave, the US government, the NSA, has actually done forensic analysis of the blockchain to pinpoint one individual in Iran who is on the US sanctions list and has found their particular Bitcoin address and put that on the sanctions list. So that's through tracing the whole chain.
Hi, I wanted to ask, so if I'm mining and my incentive is to get, if I'm able to solve it in time or sort of probability wise, etc. So you said it's 12.5 Bitcoins per, so who decides that? Or is that
the software,
a constant?
the network.
Okay.
The software network decides it itself. And once the difficulty reaches a certain point, it will become half.
Oh,
So that's built into the software. So everyone who's running a mining rig, everyone who's running a node has a copy of the software, and it's all happening within the protocol layer of that software.
So it keeps changing, can fluctuate?
No.
Oh, no.
So it will be at 12.5 until the difficulty reaches a certain point, then it will become half that. So we'll keep having roughly every 4 to 5 years.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Indrapreet. This question is for Shantanu. I'm here. My question is that when we are talking about mining, we are saying that it's a way of incentivizing for the transaction to happen. So we know that there are going to be eventually 21 million, and probably that number can go up. Once we reach that number, the transaction are still going to continue. What is the incentive at that time for the nodes? What happens in such a situation where we reach that 21 million?
So when do you assume 21 million will happen?
Sorry?
When do you think 21 million will happen?
It depends how much China wants to invest in it.
No.
It's North
Well,
Korea,
if that were the case, I
actually.
would have invested more. So that's not the case. Okay, 21 million has been designed to get over in the year 2140.
Okay.
Which is 100 years from now, 120 years. I don't know what's going to happen.
Okay.
Whether Bitcoin is going to survive, etc. But as of now, the incentive lies in the fact that there is a reward.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you, by the time 2040 comes, 2040 tak, 99% of the Bitcoins will get over. What remains is the fractions of Bitcoin. But during that point in time, I'm talking about 100 million fractions, okay, of one Bitcoin. That's Satoshi's, right? 2140 mein what has been told in the entire system is that transactions fees will take over. And because each individual value of Bitcoins getting transferred from each other, being transacted, the value will be so high that every transaction fee will be as minimal as what can be. But currently the incentive was mining is primarily the the rewards. Later on it will become the transaction fee.
So in case if the decision is that,
I'll give you the arithmetic behind it. Presently, if you mine a block, and please, I just cannot use terms like mine a block because they mean nothing to most of us, but I'm taking off from various. I've been a professor in my life, so I hate saying things which people don't understand. Today, for every 12.5 new Bitcoin that get created, roughly 1 Bitcoin is being collected as fees from everybody and given. This used to be, if I go back 10 years ago, 0 and 50. So the mining reward is coming down, the transaction processing reward is going up. The expectation is that by the year 2022, not 120 years later, in the next 3-4 years. No, I'm talking of transaction fee. Bitcoin effectively will become a self-governing currency. Namely, the fees collected from everybody will be enough to incentivize the entire network. But whether it happens by 2040 or, as I said, 2022, we have up to 2140 for it to happen.
but at the same time, if the decision, we spoke about consensus, if the number decided is that from 21 million we want to double it to...
Nobody has any incentive to do that.
So in that case, will the process of mining simplified or will it only become more difficult?
Very simply, and I'm just going to give you a very short answer. To do such a thing, that is to change the number 21 million, goes against the economic incentive of everybody who actually has the power to do it.
Yeah.
So if I have the power to change 21 million to a bigger number, I will be the one most hurt by it. So though theoretically he is right that the code can be changed, it's software.
Yes.
But there is no way in hell that will happen. Yeah. Unless human nature changes and we prefer to be poorer, then richer, dead, then alive. Unless that sort of change occurs societally, it's not going to happen.
But it's still a possibility. It can still happen.
It's a software program you're running. You can write any number in it.
So in that sense, then it doesn't become immutable. There is a possibility of changing
immutability is different.
The governing laws of how it functions.
Immutability is completely different.
Immutability not in terms of storing the information on it, but changing just the
It's software.
just the
Anybody can
layout
change
of it.
software at any time. But because it is such a widely distributed and widely used protocol, a lot of people have to agree that this can be done. And as Ajit said, nobody's going to do that. Nobody.
But it's still a possibility. No,
Sure.
they may do it or they may not do it.
Sure,
but
there's a
it's
possibility of a lot of things that can happen
My
that have
point
a
is
much
that-
higher probability
My point
of
is
this.
that anyone who would have a higher power in that situation can do it.
No.
So I think we'll take the debate
All right.
outside because
Okay.
that's
Sure.
question.
Hi, correct me if I'm wrong, that you have said blockchain is a software essentially, right? So, can cryptocurrency be created by anyone here by writing a software about that?
Sure, you can start Nama Coin tomorrow.
Okay. Then...
that doesn't mean it has any value.
Okay.
It can have great value, right? You have to buy tickets using Nama coin, right?
So there can be a point in time then where we have many cryptocurrencies, right?
There's about 2,000 cryptocurrencies today.
We do have, right? So then the demand and supply of all those cryptocurrency will affect the, because we are just discussing about the Bitcoin right now, right? So in that case, the value of the Bitcoin, the inherent value which we are talking about, the demand and supply, can go down because we'll have plethora of cryptocurrencies out there.
So you're absolutely right. And the question is, with the increase in the number of cryptocurrencies out there, will Bitcoin decline in value because other people will decide to use other cryptocurrencies?
Right.
So the answer is yes and no. Okay? There's about 2,000 different cryptocurrencies today. The vast majority of them are based on the original Bitcoin source code. And that's why we're using Bitcoin as a proxy for the whole industry. Even though there are 2,000 or so cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin is by far the largest in terms of market cap and usage. Most of the top 10 or top 20 are still tiny, tiny fractions of what Bitcoin is in terms of usage or value. And more people have found bugs in some of these other projects because they're newer. People are doing all kinds of things where things happen. And Bitcoin's been the most stable for the longest period of time from a software perspective. So yes, when Ethereum launched, there were people who sold their Bitcoin and used that money to buy Ethereum really, really early on. Ethereum went up in value. Some of them still hold their Ethereum. Some of them have decided to diversify and say, I'm going to sell some of that Ethereum and go back into Bitcoin to some degree. It's like any other asset, right? So this is where, okay, you're looking at technology when you're building it. Now you have to look at the economics and say, what makes sense here? And then you're going to look at it as an asset and say, well, you know, am I going to put all my eggs in one basket, or am I going to diversify my holdings into other things? So yes and no. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is that even though these altcoins have gained popularity, Bitcoin has still continued to rise much faster than most of those other coins have.
But the demand and supply of Bitcoin can fluctuate in future.
Well, it's sure. I mean, demand and supply for everything of any value will fluctuate. That's inherent, right? So, you know, we've been talking primarily about Bitcoin, but crypto exchanges, which ZebPay is one. Crypto exchanges is where people traditionally have bought and sold their cryptocurrencies. And it's not too dissimilar from a stock exchange or any sort of marketplace where people are transacting and buying and selling something of value, right? In this case, it is a digital product, and so settlement of that digital product is relatively easy. You're not actually having to send stock certificates around to people, to their owners and things like that. That's what exchanges facilitate, right? They typically make money through transaction fees, and in a lot of cases, in most cases, withdrawal fees. So every time you take your money out of the exchange, they usually will take some percentage of your holdings as a transaction fee to let that money out. And a lot of that money is used to actually pay the transaction fees for the chain itself, right? So there's a reason that those fees are charged. ICOs and IEOs, I don't really want to dive into these things in too much detail because that's going to be another 4-hour discussion. But traditionally, IPOs have been ways of companies raising capital, right? And I guess 2014, Ethereum decided that, look, we're going to launch a new blockchain platform that's going to be the world computer that you can run all kinds of applications on, but we need some money to get started. Right? So can somebody donate Bitcoin to us? So they did. It wasn't called an ICO or initial coin offering at the time, but that kind of set a pattern for people to say, I have a new project, I need some money to get started. Who wants to fund it? You're going to get some benefits in order to fund it early on, blah, blah, blah. But that's what ICOs became. However, in 2017, there was a lot of scams that popped up, and people, specifically government officials like the SEC, said, no, you can't do this anymore. So you may be Floyd Mayweather, but if you're going out pumping a scam coin, you are going to get penalized, right? And in some cases for a lot of money. So ICOs have more or less shut down in most places, but there are still some ICOs that happen. Instead, what's happened is we've seen a move towards IEOs, initial exchange offerings. So in this particular case, you will have a project that is going to list on one particular exchange. You can go in and you can bid on it, and they have a way of allocating how many coins people will get. You have to be a member, and there are exchanges who are going to make a lot of money off of this. Personally, I'm not a fan of either of these. I think the way a lot of these things are run are very scammy, even though there are some legitimate projects out there. Just the way that these things work, it's hard for the average individual investor to go in and know which ones are good and which ones they can make money from. So the ones who really benefit from these things right now are exchanges and the project owners. And in some cases, because they're unregulated in most places, you see a lot of weird backroom dealing that's going on. So skip through that. Some resources, international exchanges. There are very few exchanges that are actually alive anymore in India, unfortunately. And again, I will share all of these things online so you can take a look later on, and that's me.
I have two basic questions, but I'm trying to find analogies in my head to explain this.
Okay.
Is a Bitcoin like a really giant prime number that you are trying to find? Like it's a very big prime number that is found. As you said, it's a puzzle, right?
So yes, I mean, in a very simplistic way, you can say yes. Let me find the some ridiculous prime number, and I just need like a lot of computing power to find that.
Right, and the second question is about that, which is basically, is it like I am turning my computer on and putting it on for a large, just years, I guess, and the electricity and the equipment and the cost that I'm spending on finding that, that prime number becomes the value? Is that a way to look at it?
It's a component in the value. It's not the value itself, but it's a component in deriving that. So if you look at how transactions happen, the transactions have to be verified, right? So the miners play a role in verifying the transactions and including them into a block that gets written to an immutable chain, right? Now, when you are writing that to the chain, you're spending a lot of money in resources, whether it's cooling, people, computers. There's a cost. There's an inherent cost for you to be running a mine, right? And what is the number today? $4,000 or so, roughly, per coin is what the average cost that's estimated, somewhere around that range. So if the price of Bitcoin falls below $4,000, miners don't have an incentive to verify transactions anymore. So a lot of miners will shut their mines down, and that's what a lot of people did in 2018. Right? So what Ajit was saying before about power consumption went down, technology had a chance to kind of find that curve again, more efficient chips started coming out from AMD and NVIDIA and all these other guys, and we found a balance again, right? But the cost is still, it fluctuates. Over time, you might need more machines, more people, cost goes up. It might be $10,000 a coin at some point. So that helps determine what is the bare minimum that a miner is willing to accept for verifying a transaction. So it's a component in the value.
Right.
So, question, what determines the ability of an entity to be able to mine the Bitcoin successfully, and how is fairness ensured in selecting the entity, or in like what is the variable here? Because if it's about computing power by itself, then you can throw more guns at the problem, more ammunition at the problem, and win.
And that's what's happened. To a large degree, that's what's happened. You have places like China, right, where power was cheap. You can get hydroelectric power. You can go to Iceland, all kinds of stuff where people were buying relatively inexpensive chips that were tuned specifically for mining, putting them in very cold places next to very cheap power, and putting a lot of machines in. So they suddenly got a huge advantage over individuals. So when Bitcoin first started, it was mostly individuals that were mining things on their laptops and their home computers, right? That's no longer the case. None of us in this room are going to be professional miners. It's just too cost prohibitive for us to do so. So there is that element of like, hey, do miners have too much power? And that results in a lot of issues where like people say, look, we're going to fork and we're going to create our own coin.
So also just explain to me.
And Shantanu might have more to add to this.
So one, again, basic question. A lot of this you said, a lot of the decisions around Bitcoin are made by the community, you said, right? And it effectively relies on consensus within the community.
Yes.
What is the process of that decision making in terms of, is it like, the Indian Parliament where parliamentarians don't go to vote and therefore you fix the whole thing? Like, what is the process of decision making here, and how do you, because consensus building is nuts, right? And having at an almost like an anonymous global scale. So who are the key players in that consensus?
So exchanges, miners, they're the biggest players.
And is it like everyone, on what basis do they have votes in that decision? Is it like
There's no real votes per se. I mean,
so how does decision making happen? Do you know? Should I?
Were you at that meeting? Were you at that infamous meeting?
Sorry. So Bitcoin, or any other name you have heard for any token, is an incentive system and a governance system. The whole economy of cryptocurrency runs on incentive and governance. So his question is, but to introduce governance, people have to somehow vote. The act of mining is doing several things. One is processing of transaction. I send you money. How does it actually reach you? Because some miner has authenticated the transaction. But while we focus on that, everybody who has attached their computing power, and by the way, I can mine on my mobile phone with something as weak as this, it may achieve nothing. As in, it may not even achieve the amount I used to charge it, but it can be done. Every time you mine, if you have a vote and there is an open question, your computing power is effectively your vote. So for instance, if let us say the computing power that is in my mobile phone is 1 vote, somebody who has a much bigger computer has 100 votes. Somebody who has still bigger computer might have more votes, and since so many people are part of the network, this became very important, where on 1st of August in 2018, somebody came and said that I'm going to create a Bitcoin which is the real Bitcoin, your Bitcoin is wrong. Right? This happened on 1st of August 2017.
Well,
sorry.
the fork happened in 17.
That's correct.
The meeting was much earlier.
The decision making started around 9 months before. And on that day, we created 2 types of Bitcoin. One of them is today called Bitcoin, the other is called Bitcoin Cash. There has been history after that also. But how did everybody vote for whether we accept this as Bitcoin or that? Simply by the computing power that you attached when you were mining. Simply that. All other players, such as all of us, are part of the Bitcoin ecosystem because we are attending a session on Bitcoin. They don't get a vote. Exchanges don't get a vote. Owners of Bitcoin don't get a vote. So if you go and buy.
Exchanges don't get a vote on the network, but offline, exchanges are a very powerful influence of what happens.
Very simply, if you created your own coin and all exchanges got together and said, you know what, we want to list it, that coin is absolutely meaningless. True. Yeah. But in terms of the technological governance, which he says, how does it get determined? Everybody who is mining, which is called running a software, has a vote in the decision making in proportion to how much computers or computing power they are using. That is exactly the precise answer to what you're saying.
In that sense, so it's basically a 2/3 majority, or what? What is this? How does it work?
In effect, it is 50.001. It has to be greater than 50%.
Okay. Yeah.
And just by the way, suppose 95% people said this and 5% people said that. The nature of this people's money or decentralized economy is that those 5% could say, you know what, we don't like you remaining 95, so we are going to start our own blockchain, which is how these 6,500 coins, not 2,000, 2,000 is the current amount traded, 6,500 coins got created, where everybody said, I'm going off on my own chain, I'm going off on my own chain. Now, whether that chain has any merit, whether anybody will listen to the story of these 5% is a social phenomenon, right? But Bitcoin by itself will change with 50+%. You are free to make any coin that you like.
Understood.
It's like Brexit.
There's just to add to that, there is a system called a proposaling. So anybody, so you and me cannot change the entire software. It's probably a software developer or somebody who understands the system very well. They have to propose. It's called a Bitcoin Improvement Proposal, BIP. all right? And it has to be posted for an entire community of developers to see. So anybody developing on the Bitcoin core has to first go through that. And and there is a system mentioned over there that only when 30% or 45% or 55% or 95% people agree to that change, that is when it gets implemented. So if you go through to a site called GitHub and you type Bitcoin improvement proposal, you will see there are numerous proposals which are there and they're all accepted. And as he says, the only people who actually rule the rooks are the ones who mine. Okay, they have to transfer because it has to be mined in a different software, a different version. Imagine you having Microsoft Word 2010 and now we are living in 2019, but you have to use that. So unless it comes to use, it will never happen, and hence the miners take a lot of root here.
Thank you, everyone.